Welcome to our San Francisco Mayoral Candidate Forum at the Museum of the African Diaspora. This forum is hosted by several of the city's most prominent business and hospitality organizations: Advance SF, the SF Chamber of Commerce, the Bay Area Council, BOMA SF, the Hotel Council of San Francisco, the Golden Gate Restaurant Association, and SF Travel. The aim is to hear from each candidate equally in a neutral setting. We're hosting 5 separate interviews. Each candidate will be asked identical questions. There may be an opportunity for a few follow-up questions per candidate. Each interview is 45 minutes and in front of a live audience. The Coalition of Host Organizations is not endorsing any candidates, and these interviews are being made public for educational purposes. I'm Margaret Conley and will serve as moderator. Let's get started with Supervisor Ahsha Safai. So what is driving you to be mayor?
You know, I've dedicated 24 years of my life, public service in this city. Started under Mayor Willie Brown, and all the way through to being president of the retirement fund, being on the board for the last 7.5 years, and we can get into that. But I think this city has grown to be one that's out of reach for a lot of middle class, working families. So my vision for the city and the thing that's driving me to run is to be a voice for all San Franciscans so they can continue to live here, they can afford to live here, they can thrive here, they can work here, feel safe, send their kids to school. So my vision and the reason I'm running for mayor is because I want to be a mayor for all San Franciscans.
We're here in downtown San Francisco at the beautiful MOAD. What are your plans for a thriving downtown, for the business community, for residents, for workers, for sports and cultural institutions too?
So I just left committee this morning where my legislation to create a downtown higher education university fund was voted on and sent to the full Board of Supervisors tomorrow to be voted on. We looked at the model. I'm a city planner by training, went to MIT. I've been doing planning work in this city for 24 years. But one of the things I learned working under Mayor Gavin Newsom is let's look at the best practices around the country. So we did that, and the area that I found that had the best model was New York City and Phoenix, Arizona. So we invited a delegation from Arizona State University to come and tour our city and talk about what they did, which was 18 years ago, the city of Phoenix put out an RFP. They were able to buy a few parcels in their downtown. Fast forward, 12,000 students are studying there, living there, thriving there, and it's completely revitalized their downtown. 4 million square feet of office space occupied, 12,000 students, over $6 billion of revenue. So my downtown education university fund would create an opportunity for philanthropy and government to work together, put money in the fund, could use bonds to purchase buildings. We'd put out an RFP, and I think it would be transformative. And if you look at every major world-class city around the world, Shanghai, London, New York, Boston, Chicago, all of them have a significant university presence, not just satellites, not just people going and studying, but people living there as well. And so that would be a centerpiece. We convened with some of the groups that are hosting this event today, Downtown Recovery, Downtown Reimagining Working Group. The other thing that we kept hearing over and over again, and I led that, I was the chair of that, was people want the space to be clean and safe. It's kind of basic, sounds basic, but if people don't feel safe, if it doesn't feel clean, they're not going to come back and occupy. We have over 40 million square feet of empty office space, highest vacancy rate in the entire country. So we have to think about creative ideas to jumpstart that. The other thing the universities do is and we learned this in the working group, very reliant on, and we have been, to, in many ways, kind of embracing being the center of innovation, very reliant on tech and public services. Just so happens that industry has gone overwhelmingly remote. It's part of the reason why we have the highest empty office space. Universities help us diversify our economy. making sure it's clean and safe has to be a top priority. So two other things, and then I know you have other questions, but I introduced legislation to create proactive community policing, putting officers out of their cars on the streets. You can witness it right now in Union Square. You have officers present and visible. You want that to be almost across the board in the areas of the downtown. And then clean. You know, I worked at Public Works for a couple of years under the Newsom administration. I would make that department 24 hours. We do a really good job, oftentimes up until 8 p.m., 10 p.m., but we need to put shift some of our resources, like, again, many of the world-class cities where they're constantly cleaning our space. So those would be three of the initiatives that I would work on. And then, of course, we were involved in passing legislation recently to do some office to residential conversion, again, getting people living and thriving here. We've just enhanced and passed the opportunity to create more entertainment zones, to get more live activities out and about. All of those elements together, I think, will help to revitalize and reimagine our downtown.
Can you share some more findings from the other world-class cities? New York, you mentioned Phoenix and you gave some examples. New York, what did we learn from New York?
I mean, one of the things that New York heavily does is they do a lot of public-private partnerships. They take a lot of their government money. They're investing in small businesses. They're investing in business startups and inviting the private sector to come partner with them. I think we do a good job in some areas. I think we can do a better job. And so my university fund would allow for private investment in philanthropy along with government. And I think that's a model to continue to replicate.
And what are the next few steps with the university fund?
So the legislation will be voted on tomorrow. That will be one of my top priorities as mayor. Obviously, the election's in November. I mean, of course, if Mayor Breed wanted to take some money and work with us on that, I'd be happy to partner and collaborate with her. But the mayor in our city, you know, contrary to a lot of misinformation, is the most powerful position when it comes to allocation of funding. So the mayor has the power to hire and fire department heads, power to appoint a majority on every single commission, and importantly, has the final say on allocating of funds. Every June, we negotiate around the edges and put the final touches on the budget, but ultimately the mayor has the final say on spending. So obviously, if we could get some additional funding to get it going now, it'd be great. We have the opportunity, and we wrote in there today to allow for bond financing to purchase buildings. But listen, if you look at the commercial real estate market, and I don't have to tell this audience, we're at a historic low in terms of value. And this is the time to buy. This would be the time to invest. And I think this would be the time to reimagine.
Public safety, and you talked about this a little bit already, but it's a big campaign issue. How will you protect the public, fight crime, and work with the various agencies like the SFPD and the SFDA to ensure safety in our city?
So the proposal that I put forward was a comprehensive plan. Every single police station is now required to have a community policing plan. Every station right now has money allocated for overtime to encourage officers to get out of their cars, get on the beat, and do the foot patrols, okay? As mayor, that will be one of my top priorities. We need a chief and a mayor to work together to embrace that philosophy. Again, you're talking about looking at other cities around the world and around the country. I had the great fortune of studying under Governor Michael Dukakis at Northeastern University. As part of that project, I got to interact with the chief of police at the time. His name was Bill Bratton. He started the community policing in an aggressive way in the early 90s in Boston. He then went on to New York City and became the chief of police there and fully implemented that model of getting proactive community policing, putting officers in the areas where there's high crime. We have to have a change in philosophy, and it requires a mayor that can work with the chief, work with all the different stakeholders to get the officers out there. So that would be, I'm going to continue to keep saying that because it's a really big deal for me. Something else that I just introduced that will be voted on is a loan forgiveness fund for our first responders. A lot of people zero in on our police officers, but if you look at all the different elements of our public safety delivery system, 911, paramedics, firefighters, sheriffs, police officers, nurses, all of them have staffing shortages. So if you call 911 right now, we're only responding in the mandated time 71% of the time. We have to do better to fill those positions. So the proposal I have put forward is a loan forgiveness fund. This is the first year in California history that you have to have a 4-year degree to be a police officer. A lot of the other categories that I talked about, a lot of the other sectors, also require ongoing education, whether you're a paramedic, sheriff, firefighter, nurse. Nurses come in with debt as well, educational debt. So we see it as a recruitment tool and a retention tool. So they can get up to $25,000 in loan forgiveness. So that's a retention piece. We have to address the shortages. And I think that's two really big elements of what I would like to focus on in terms of our public safety and change in philosophy as well.
Do you think that will be enough?
Absolutely. I mean, I can tell you in 2007, okay, here's one more piece. I'm glad you said that. For the last 5 years, just in police, our recruitment budget has stayed at $250,000. That is not sufficient. You have to invest the dollars into recruitment, particularly in a tough market. This mayor has not done that. And what I was going to say is in 2007, just 1 year in 2007, we graduated 307 officers in 1 year. If we did that now, we would be well on our way to achieving the appropriate staffing levels. So we can do it. We have to put the energy into it. So having a loan forgiveness, having the opportunity to get officers out of their cars on the footbeat. Another thing that does, and I didn't mention it, it also increases the positive interactions that the police have with the community. I think there's been a time over the last few years where morale has gone really low. And I think that one of the best ways you can recruit for a department is word of mouth. Any department. Could be for any of the organizations here, could be public agencies. People talk to one another and they say, do you feel supported? Do you encouraged to do your work? And I think having those positive interactions with the community also help to raise morale. And our current officers will be our biggest recruiters, but we have to have the investment in the recruitment budget as well.
And that's what you mean also by the change in philosophy. Can you share more about that?
Listen, I started my job sworn in January, I think 6th or 7th, 2017. Our chief of police was sworn in 2 days later. He is the longest serving chief in our city's history in the last 50 years, okay? Most chiefs serve for a few years, and they come in with a mandate. Chief Scott's mandate was police reform. At the time, we had a lot of officer-involved shootings. We had the Department of Justice come in and require us to make significant changes. They had 272 recommendations to change the philosophy of our police department. We've accomplished that in 7 years. He's done a phenomenal job in that regard. But I think if you asked him, he would admit and say to you, this is his last year as chief. So we have to have someone that comes from that school now that's ready to do proactive community policing, looking where the crime is, putting the officers in those locations and proactively, and not just in the downtown, by the way. I know we're talking a lot about downtown, but we have to do it in the neighborhoods as well.
Since the Supreme Court's hearing on the Grants Pass case, what is your plan for how we'll manage our homeless, unsheltered population?
I'm glad you asked that. We are releasing our 5-point plan this week to end street homelessness. One of the biggest things that we don't do, that we need to do better, is we only count the number of people that are unhoused on our streets every 2 years because we're required to. We have to do that for federal funding. As mayor, I will require us to do that on a more consistent basis. And when we're measuring our success, when we're using data and metrics to measure the outcomes, we see a significant result. I started that process 18 months ago. Our Department of Homeless Supportive Housing was the largest city agency without any oversight and accountability. So I ran a ballot measure, 68% of the voters supported it. It required mandatory audits. it required that department to show not only its performance outcomes, but also the financial outcomes as well. And lo and behold, we had our first round of audits start to begin with the controller last spring. The very first one, they had to call in the FBI because one of the contractors was selling vouchers to friends and family. So part of the initiative has to be weeding out bad actors and also enhancing and encouraging those that are doing a good job. Listen, we have the resources in our city to address this crisis, almost a $16 billion budget. This Department of Homeless Supportive Housing, which is has the primary responsibility to deal with this crisis, started out in 2016 as a $100 million department. It's grown to over $700 million. So we got to bring the accountability and oversight. We got to have mandatory audits to do the performance network. So I would we're going to have a constant going out counting. We're going to reorganize some of the mayor's office to bring back the Office of Neighborhood Services. So they would be one of the main point organizations to lead that effort. And we're going to begin neighborhood by neighborhood. We're going to go to the areas where there's a lot of street homelessness. We're going to do a census, and we have to create at least 60% of the number of people on the streets. We have to create 60% of that number of shelter beds. We haven't done a good job of prioritizing getting people into shelter in an aggressive manner, and it's part of the reason why the lawsuits and the court cases have held up our ability to get people off the street. If you can't document that the beds exist, if you can't document that a service exists, that's what's held us up over the last couple of years. So it's also a part of that accountability as well. So we're going to go neighborhood by neighborhood. We're going to get a census of the account. We're going to have the mayor's office along with Department of Emergency Management lead that effort with supervisors, with neighborhood leaders, with businesses to get the hold. And then once we've gotten that, then we're going to create no camping zones for at least a 1.5 mile radius in those areas. How do I know that works? We did that in my district where we created safe parking. We did the very first safe parking site. And as part of the agreement was, we're going to have a place where if you're living in a vehicle, we can get you there with 24-hour support. We're going to transition you into supportive housing. But in the surrounding area, no more living in your vehicle. So we know that model works. So I don't want to dominate the time, but it's a 5-point plan. Includes proactively going out, counting the number of people neighborhood by neighborhood, working with supervisors, working with neighborhood services, and then creating the requisite shelter, 60% of that final number, which includes tiny homes, which includes supportive housing and vouchers. And that's something that we have not done aggressively enough.
And as mayor, because we keep hearing the city has the resources to get this done. Yeah. As mayor, you can get this done.
I believe that we can make a significant dent in the amount of people that are on the streets, okay? We're not going to solve the crisis of homelessness in San Francisco. It's a larger conversation about federal government support and state support, but we absolutely can get the people in tents, people living on the streets, off the streets, and into shelter or transitional housing. And I think we absolutely have the resources and the ability. We need the management, leadership, and accountability. That's something that's been missing.
So you support the clearing of tent encampments in the city, all?
In a compassionate way, absolutely. Will be one of my top priorities is to get all of the encampments off the street, but we have to go neighborhood by neighborhood. We got to get the right number, the count right, and then we have to create the right amount of shelter and transitional space to get them there.
What's your vision for city planning? It can take years for small businesses to get permits to open a restaurant or a bar, but carts are allowed to serve food and drinks on the sidewalk. You have a master's degree in city planning from MIT.
So I've actually been speaking a little bit about that, weaving that, the response into that. But if we're talking just about the planning department or the larger vision, I mean, I think there has to be a comprehensive plan on the requisite number of housing. I think one of the biggest things that frustrates most small businesses, most people that are trying to build, most people that are trying to do anything with the city is the layers of bureaucracy and the amount of time that it takes. So as supervisor, I partnered with Supervisor Katie Tang, and what we did is if something was principally permitted, if something we knew was going to be approved, we removed the neighborhood notification process. We removed the change of use requirements that would be there instilled. And we saw dramatically, if something was a clothing store that wanted to be a restaurant, you don't have to go through this extensive, long process, an additional 18 months with appeals. You have to put the appropriate paperwork in, it has to be reviewed, and then it's approved. That's the model we need to use when it comes to city planning. We have to create timelines, aggressive timelines, to reduce the number of days that it takes to approve. And so part of that process is internal direction from within the department. I proposed last year legislation that said for the site permit process, we're going to just follow the guidelines. And guess who was the biggest resistance to that? The building department itself. They wanted to retain the ability to have discretion to add and subtract. And we said, no, you know what? We're the only county in the entire state that has a site permit. We're going to require you just follow the guidelines. And guess what? That'll probably reduce 6 to 18 months for the process. So some of it is internal guidance and leadership from the mayor working with those departments. And then the additional part has to require the mayor and the board to legislatively say, we're going to put firm timelines on these processes or remove some of the barriers. And I started that as supervisor, and I'll continue that as mayor. So I hope that gets to the crux of the question.
And any comment about the small businesses versus the carts?
Well, you know, when you're talking about brick and mortar versus talking about people that are vending on the street, definitely you have to support the folks that are stationary, have been there for years, and have been supporting our local economy. So what I tried to do is give them incentives. Like we created the shared space program, right? I created that, I led that legislation. I also did the part to say, we're going to remove the fees. Anyone that has that, the initial fee for this year, I think it's actually for 2 more weeks, anyone that applies. So we had over 1,000 people apply, save them about $20,000. We have to make sure that we're supporting our brick and mortar businesses by giving them incentives and creating opportunities for them to thrive in the city. In terms of the street vendors, I actually also led the legislation to crack down on illegal street vending. A lot of that time ends up being stolen goods, stolen items. I'm not talking about the legal street vendors. Legal street vendors have to go through our process, but the illegal street vendors, I think that's what you're referring to. We basically said there has to be due process that's required in the law. We're going to notice you, but again, tomorrow we're going to vote on closing the loophole that I think existed that says once we've given you a notice, you're noticed now for the next 120 days. We no longer have to notice you. If you can't produce receipts, if you can't produce a permit, we're taking your items. And we think that's going to be a good way to crack down on a lot of the illegal street fencing. A lot of the people are fencing stolen items, and I think that's a big distinction.
What about zoning in terms of 6 to 8-story buildings and developing the west side?
Well, you know what? My district actually is at the confluence where both the east and the west side meet. And so I look at my district as a model of how I would be as supervisor, as mayor. For the last 7 years as supervisor, we have been able to entitle and get through the process in a neighborhood that had 0 housing built. 0. 50, 60 years. We've gotten 600 units entitled, 65% of it affordable, and particularly expanding the definition of who we're building for, working families as well, not just extremely low income, but also expanding the definition to include nurses, teachers, janitors, those that made a little bit too much to affordable. And we did it in a way where we looked for infill, we looked for the zones where there were empty lots, but also I was able to get a local density bonus program passed in my first year, again with Supervisor Katie Tang, called the Home SF program, where we'll give you some additional height in exchange for additional, and density for an additional affordability. So one of the sites that we got done, that I helped to lead, was originally going to be about 80 units. It ended up being 199 units. And we added an additional floor with 25% affordable, with a child care on site, wall-to-wall union construction. So we have to look for opportunities where there's infill development, empty sites that we can enhance. But along our commercial corridors, absolutely, we have to look to increase height to 6 to 8 stories, particularly on corner lots. And the West Side has to share in the responsibility for our housing crisis. With the caveat, let's just remember, not every single neighborhood in the city is exactly the same, okay? And there are areas of the city where the streets are wider, the commercial corridors are wider, which allows you to go up higher and not overwhelm the existing structures that are in the neighborhood. Versus on the West Side, I think we haven't seen a lot of development, and we have to look for the opportunity to go to 6 to 8 stories, 8 more on the corner lots. And I'll just add this last caveat, thinking about who we're building for. And that's why I go back to what I've done in my district, where 65% of the housing was affordable in a much more expanded definition. So we're building for working families as well.
We have a lot of businesses in the room here. So what's your pitch to businesses with regards to city planning?
So, one of the things that I think has impeded a lot of businesses for wanting to either remain or return has been our business tax structure. I'm really happy to hear that the business community and labor came together to put forward a ballot measure that's going to restructure our gross receipts process. They're going to raise the threshold for exemption for smaller businesses, and it's going to reduce the burden on some of the larger gross receipts businesses. I think there's about 5 that produce the vast majority of our gross receipts. And, if we were to lose even one of them, it would be catastrophic for our city's budget. So I think this was a really good, comprehensive opportunity for business and labor to come together. And that's my background. I mean, the work that I did when I worked with organized labor was about bringing business and labor together. I was one of the lead negotiators on the collective bargaining agreement with the Warriors and the Janitors Union when they had the mid-market tax break that came in to incentivize businesses to come in. Our union was on the front lines advocating for that, because when offices are occupied, when people are there in the office, janitors are cleaning the building, security guards are providing the security, Teamsters and others are hauling away the trash. It's a wonderful symbiotic relationship between business and labor. And so my vision for business and planning would be to help to reduce the burden, but also strengthen and encourage more of the relationship between business and labor, because that's what I've done. And that's when San Francisco is at its best, I think that everyone is prospering together.
Transport is vital for the functioning of world-class cities. Do you support this, and what are your plans to transport people to the heart of San Francisco?
I do. I think there's a lot of frustration around our public transportation agency. It actually would be one of the agencies that I would make an immediate change in the leadership. I think they've done a really poor job of engaging and doing outreach whenever they have, even if they have a good idea. People often find out about it at the last minute, and then it causes a lot of ire. I go back to the Office of Neighborhood Services. Again, this would be empowering that department under the mayor to work in collaboration with the different departments, ensuring that we're informing our public and engaging with business and private citizens and others. But I think that our transportation system has done a really poor job of engaging on projects, on vision, and not following through often. And so that would be one of the major reforms that I would make. We have to figure out creative ways to support and enhance. Going back to your original question about what a lot of world-class cities do, a lot of world-class cities have a significant additional funding streams to support public transportation, so it can be world-class, it can be enhanced, and it can be expanded. And I think that's one of the things that we suffer from here. I think there might be an initiative this fall to look at some additional revenue sources to make the agency more solvent. as it survived during this downturn of ridership, which a lot of the revenue is a lot of the agency's operating revenue is incumbent upon some support from government, some ridership, but essentially it's been operating in the red. And if we're going to continue to be a world-class city, we have to fully invest in ensuring our public transportation system is robust and delivers people from neighborhood to neighborhood in a fast, clean, safe manner.
Year after year, the city seems to struggle to balance its over $15 billion budget. Do you see the city as having a revenue problem or a spending problem?
You know, I've been in the throes of it. I don't think we have a mandate to balance the budget every year. I think there's been some difficult decisions that have been made in terms of how we go about and what we prioritize. The citizens of San Francisco, residents of San Francisco have been really calling upon there to be investments in public safety. I think that was a shift from even just a few years ago. So sometimes it's hard to really manage the expectations in terms of the political environment. But I definitely believe that we have the resources, and I've said that already, that we have the resources unlike almost 20 to 30 states in the United States. $15.9 billion budget. We have some of the best public employees and people that are delivering wonderful services for our city. And even in the midst of that, we have about 4,500 positions that we're short on. And I mentioned some of those positions in public safety. So how do you balance the shortfalls versus the delivery of services? One of the things that was really disappointing in this past budget that I did not agree with the mayor on at all was cutting $24 million from our children and families and the services, some of which are so vital. Education support, STEM support, teen pregnancy intervention, violence intervention. Again, if we're talking about public safety, it's not just about investing in public safety agencies. You also have to do intervention work. And so that was a real shortfall in this budget. But we did get a commitment, and I got a commitment from the administration that they would do what they've done in the past, where they would work with the business community and some philanthropy to fund some of the shortfall. And I think that's one of the things that makes San Francisco special. We have a lot of wonderful businesses and philanthropic organizations that can come. So I think we need to enhance that a bit more and encourage that so that we're working better in partnership. But I definitely think that the real crux of where we are and what we've suffered from is a leadership, management, and accountability. And I've given you some examples of that when it comes to the Department of Homeless, Supportive Housing. DPH is another one. Every year that I was on the budget committee, they've come back mid-year and say, oh, we'd like to take this $40 or $50 million and shift it into another area of concern that the mayor is promoting. So again, they have the resources sitting there. It's just a matter of how we're managing and delivering it. So I think it's more of a management and accountability issue when it comes to the budget.
You talked about where you'd want to put more money, but what would you cut?
You know, we have a lot of expensive contracts that go out. That's one of the areas I think we need to do a better job. Go back to the nurses. They have contracted nurses that cost the city much more than it would cost to have a consistent in-house nurse for our public health clinic or even in General Hospital or Laguna Honda. So we rely heavily on contracted nurses, and we've done that for years. That's one of the contracts that I'm talking about, that they came to us and said, we want to shift all this money that we had to hire full-time nurses, and we want to transfer it into a contract for overtime and contracted nurses. A lot of the departments do a lot of contracting also with nonprofit agencies that at times can be expensive as well. So when we're looking at both the corporate contracts and the private contracts, I think it's an area to rein in some of the control. And then we have to ask some of the agencies that are asking for additional positions or expansion to really take a good look at their existing delivery system and how they can work with what they have. Particularly in these times, we have an $800 million deficit over the next 2 years. I think, we will close that using a little bit of reserve, using a little bit of one-time support from the federal government, but that doesn't solve the structural shortfall. And some of that is going to be requiring looking at those contracts and looking at some of the existing delivery within those departments.
Anything else you would cut, or departments you would ask to take a closer look at their budgets?
I absolutely would ask the Department of Public Health. It is 1/3 of our city's agency. 1/3 of our city's budget. And a lot of it is, meeting the philosophical goals of the city of St. Francis. We offer free health care to the indigent. We offer health clinics in every neighborhood. We offer some very aggressive programming when it comes to addictive care. There's a lot of really wonderful things that go into that budget. But as I said, every year I've been on the budget committee, all of a sudden they use the word fine, and I don't even like to say it because I feel like it's disrespectful to the everyday resident of San Francisco, but we found $40 million that was unspent. Now we're coming back and asking you to use it in a different way. So that would be one that we started the auditing process that I led on for the homeless agency, housing and supportive homelessness agency. We started that auditing process, but there's probably some more agencies that we really need to dive in on and do a little bit better auditing and looking at spending and performance outcomes.
Let's talk about the city's narrative. How would you summarize it, and is it real or not?
I would say it's a mix. If you asked me the same question a year ago, the narrative about San Francisco being dirty and unsafe and not a place to visit, I think if you asked me that a year ago, the answer would be an absolute yes. But today, I think things are getting better. We still have a very high empty office space vacancy rate, as we've talked about. And so what are we doing in an aggressive way? I've talked to you about some of those initiatives that I put forward. But I want to back up a little because I think we could have avoided where we are right now. In fact, I know we could. So I have been one of the loudest voices about organized retail theft. And it was right when COVID started that we started to see this trend of people walking into stores and taking items with impunity. I went to the mayor, August of 2020, and I asked her straight up, I said, Madam Mayor, let me tell you what I witnessed. And I asked her for support. So I was at my Walgreens. I saw it online. I thought, is this really happening? Let me go down and talk myself to the frontline folks. And as I was standing with my staffer who's here today, as I was standing there, 10 young men came walking down the street with empty bags and went into that Walgreens. Within 2 minutes, they were out, bags full, took items, kind of high-fiving, no care in the world, and then they kind of just lightly jogged down the street and got on the back of a bus. I went to the mayor. I said, we got to get out in front of this. This is going to ruin our city's reputation. It's going to tear our city apart. And you know what she said to me? She said, I'm sorry, Ahsha. These businesses need to do more. It can't just be on us. And I said, please don't say that out loud. And sure enough, the reason I'm sharing this story is because she did. She did say that. Fast forward, I have a hearing. I invited the Gap, Target, Walgreens, CVS. They all came in, Safeway, they all came into my hearing to talk about retail theft. And while we were there, the head of loss prevention for CVS said, San Francisco is one of the epicenters of organized retail theft in the country. And they showed us charts, how much they spend to prevent it, how much loss they have. Okay, that was March of 2021. No joke, as I'm in the hearing, my car got broken into in front of City Hall. So you fast forward a little bit longer down to Black Friday 2021, we all remember what happened in Union Square. Louis Vuitton was overrun, hundreds of people came into Union Square. That was the image that went around the world. I was getting calls from people in all parts of the country, have family members in Europe. I mean, that's all that everyone's talking about. San Francisco, it's just pure mayhem. And so what I did was put together a working group. I got the chief, the sheriff, the district attorney, the California Retailers Association, the NAACP, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, We all got to, Fisherman's Wharf, CBD, Union Square, Alliance Hotel Council, Union Square, CBD. We all got to the table. 3 things came out of that. We wanted to have expanded law enforcement, and that's part of the reason why I started working on getting officers out of their car and onto the street. I passed legislation to get sheriffs for the first time out of government buildings and have the ability to hire and out in public. The second thing we did was going back to the illegal street vending, because we saw that on the street. We introduced the legislation to make it a requirement. There was a state law that says police can't lead on that. So just want to be clear to everybody. But Public Works can, so we wanted to enforce that. And then the third thing, because I worked for Gavin Newsom, governor, was communicating with his department. California Highway Patrol put out additional resources, and we were able to apply for grant and support money, okay? We just got approved for that grant in November, December. That's the money that laid the groundwork for the security cameras that are all over they're being implemented all over our city now. So I didn't wait, but I also didn't have the power of the mayor's office to put a full force effort. Now you fast forward a couple years, so last year they started putting together a strike team, they're going undercover, they're arresting people. You want people to stop stealing things? Regardless of what the law is, misdemeanor or felony, they have to be arrested if they're stealing. And that's something that was missing.
And will this be a priority for you and your mayor?
Absolutely. It's been a priority for me for the last 3 years. It will continue to be a priority for me because we can't live in a city where people take things. I've done 104 events since I announced running for mayor. Every event that I've had, people say, I ask people, who's gone into a Walgreens or a Safeway and seen people take things? If I ask this audience right now, every single hand would go up. So part of the reputation is real, but we're working on it and changing it, and we're starting to get out in front of it, but it's not done yet.
A few more questions. What is your leadership style? As an example, how would you work with the Board of Supervisors?
Well, you know what? I mean, one of the most impactful presidents that we had in terms of legislative accomplishments in our country was Lyndon Johnson. You look at his track record, but he was also a senator. He also knew the legislative process. So I think it's an advantage to be on the board, know the members of the board. If you heard of the debate the other night, I had one mayoral candidate, Mark Farrell, say that if not him, me. And then on the other end, you had Supervisor Aaron Peskin, President Peskin, say, if not him, me. And both of them said in a very concrete way, my ability to bring people together and collaborate. When I worked on the Student Success Fund, when I worked on the Citywide Project Labor Agreement, even when I worked with the business community here on waste diversion, we worked together, took amendments, we found a way to get to consensus and get to yes. And I think if you look at my track record, I think that's the thing that distinguishes me, is my ability to collaborate, get people to the table, and genuinely take input to try to get to a compromise and yes.
We have a few minutes left, so we'll do brief responses.
Rapid questions.
If you win, what would success look like for the first 100 days of the new term?
So absolutely, I think we have to declare a state of emergency when it comes to our overdose crisis in our city. 811 people died. That number has to go down, and there's so many other elements that are involved in illegal drug dealing, drug use, recovery, drug addiction prevention. All of it's related. So I'm going to have a massive plan to address that head on.
What's your vision for the future of the city of San Francisco?
Listen, I have nothing but hope for the city of San Francisco. I know this city will continue to be one of the world-class cities and the best cities in the world. I know our economy is going to come back just as strong as it always has been. But I want it to be a clean city, a safe city, a city that everyone can raise their family in or live in and thrive in, not just billionaire families and low income, but everyone working and middle-class families as well. So my vision for San Francisco and a successful city is one that we continue to have that level of representation.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I just want to summarize by saying, I worked for two mayors, Mayor Willie Brown and Gavin Newsom. I was a deputy department head. I worked at Public Works. I ran my own small business for almost a decade. I work with organized labor, been on the board for 7.5 years, 3 on the budget committee. 1 as the president of the retirement fund, a $33 billion investment fund. I come ready for this job day one. This is not an entry-level position. You have to be ready to step in, take the reins, and sit down with many of the people in this room, labor community, philanthropy, everyone. And I think that's the thing that distinguishes me from the rest of the pack, is my level of training and my level of collaboration.
Well, thank you very much to our San Francisco host organizations, to the Museum of the African Diaspora, and to Supervisor Ahsha Safai.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thanks for having me here today.
Thank you.